And it's another trading day right here in Lagos, Nigeria. We're following the money at this point. Here's what's coming up at the next 25 minutes. Data from financial derivatives company shows price of a crate of egg in Nigeria has dropped sharply by about 15.4%. And Purchasing Managers Index shows South Africa's private sector that grew in July, but cost pressures rise. I will see Kenya maize prices that hits a 20-month high as the Kenyan shilling heads for harvesting season. It's good to have you join us. I'm Ladi Williams. We're going to check what's playing out with other markets that we track now. We see oil prices are still down at this point, following early trade. It's trading up about $68, 63 cents a barrel. And we see WTI, that's also down, following weaker global demand against President Trump's threats there to India over its Russian oil purchases. So we're seeing that impact right there. And the Organization of Petroleum Exporting Countries and its allies, together known as OPEC, agreed to raise oil production by 547,000 barrels. So we're seeing all of that play out and weigh down on price of oil. So that's 70 range there. We've lost that for a while now. We see BP PLC CEO Murray Nichols has forecasted that oil supply from non-OPEC producers will peak in early 2026 before flattening out for at least a year, even as global demand remains firm. Speaking on Bloomberg Television following the company's second quarter earnings release, Auchincloss projected that growth from non-OPEC sources, including U.S. shale, Brazil, and Canada, that's expected to slow sharply after February or March of next year. I also see analysts from Goldman Sachs, they support this outlook. They estimate non-OPEC plus production growth will drop from about 1.05 million barrels per day to about 0.6 million barrels per day if Brent crude averages $60 per barrel in 2026 and declines further if prices fall towards about $50 per barrel. And Nigeria's indigenous oil company, First Exploration and Petroleum Development Company, have signed a memorandum of understanding with the Tanzania Petroleum Development Corporation, as a TDBC, to assess and potentially develop the Mzani Bay North Block, a gas-rich concession in southern Tanzania. The deal, signed mid-July at TPDC headquarters in Dodoma, marks a bold step as First EP takes its operations beyond Nigeria in line with broader continental ambitions for an African-led energy development from the Tanzanian side. There we see officials, they framed the partnership as a milestone under the 2015 Petroleum Act, which empowers TDPC to form upstream collaborations. The agreement is seen as advancing national energy goals, including improving household access, reducing reliance on biomass, and catalyzing regional energy trade through gas distribution. And we're also seeing other metals we track too, right there with gold also subdued at this point. So we're seeing that pressure right there on the precious metal this afternoon. To other matters in Western Africa now, we see Ghana's government has given satellite broadcasts, as a broadcaster, DSTV, until Thursday to lower subscription prices or face a suspension of its broadcasting license. The communications minister confirmed this, and we see Samuel Nate George said that he had instructed the National Communications Authority to begin suspension proceedings against MultiChoice Ghana, as a local operator of DSTV, if it fails to comply with regulatory expectations for a price cut by August 7th. That's in about 2 days at this point. We'll definitely be watching that space over there. And we see in South Africa, the private sector that expanded slightly in July, marking the third consecutive month of growth, helped by renewed sales growth and sustained employment increases. That's according to the PMI survey released today. The S&P Global South Africa Purchasing Managers Index, that rose to 50.3 points in July from 50.1 in June. S&P Global reported that, and the readings above 50 indicate growth in business activity, while below that signals contraction. New orders and employment were the primary contributors to the headline figure, as new business volumes that increased following a dip in June. So that's what we're seeing in South Africa. And we're seeing Kenya also released their PMI there. We see private sector that contracted at the fastest pace in a year in July as input prices rose and protests that disrupted some businesses, according to the survey. And the Stanbic Bank Kenya Purchasing Managers Index, that fell 46.8 points in July from 48.6 a month earlier. And definitely we see readings below that, means that that's below 50 indicates contraction, and that's what we're seeing right there in Kenya. And also in Kenya, we see Kenya maize prices that hit a 20-month high, about 6,400 shillings ahead of the harvest season. This came even after the government allowed duty-free imports or yellow maize to ease competition for the cereal from animal feed producers in July. The average price of a kilogram of loose maize, that sold for about 71 Kenyan shillings, the highest since November 2023, when the average price was about 71.98 Kenyan shillings, according to the data compiled there by the Kenya National Bureau of Statistics. And in a sign of accelerating momentum, 61 startups secured at least $100,000 in funding during July, totaling approximately $550 million, a sharp rise compared to the early year average of around 40 deals per month. Of those, 41 startups were based in the top 4 startup hubs in Africa, while overall funding spanned 15 countries, including Libya. Libya's first ever $100,000 plus recorded a startup deal there. July activity marked an inflection point with both volume and deal sizes picking up significantly, reflecting renewed confidence from venture investors and a broader geographic spread there coming into play. So we're still seeing data from the big deal there showing that African startups are still raising money and beating the previous headlines we saw before now. All right, to other matters now in South Africa, we see there's some issue between the South Africa's finance minister and the Monetary Policy Committee there. We see the Reserve Bank governor that they've been having issues over the country's inflation target, and it's exposing rising tensions between monetary policy control and political authority. In a bold move, the South African Reserve Bank has unilaterally lowered its inflation target to 3%, bypassing the finance ministry, which maintains that it alone has the power to set such a policy. Despite ongoing discussions with National Treasury governor there, he announced a new target this past Thursday in response to President Cyril Ramaphosa's strong condemnation of the Reserve Bank's decision, criticizing it for overstepping its mandate. Take a listen.
We began a discussion on the issue of monetary policy and specifically the role and the value of inflation targeting. Everyone understands that it is the Minister of Finance, together with Cabinet, who sets the inflation target in consultation with the South African Reserve Bank. The Reserve Bank then operates independently in pursuit of the inflation target that will have been agreed upon. We need to have further discussion within government on how we give effect to our conference resolutions and manifesto commitments to align monetary, fiscal, and trade policy. On local government, we were reminded that local government is the epicenter of infrastructure decline and poor service delivery.
Well, let's get a check on the commodities market now. We see the price of a crate of egg in Nigeria. That's dropped sharply, according to FDC data there, about 14% drop there, and has remained steady for several months. Yet, we're still seeing chicken prices there. That's staying stable, but that's supposed to be closely tied to egg production, but it's held firmly, at this point. What's driving that? That's left a couple of analysts puzzled at this point. Let's bring in Alamin Vincent now as an analyst, financial derivatives company. Great to have you on the show.
Thank you for having me. Yeah.
All right, so what's driving the prices down sharply?
Come again?
What's driving the price of eggs down sharply? And, I did speak to someone earlier. They said that eggs are still expensive in some parts of, Lagos. Well, your data is showing us that egg prices have dropped significantly, about 10 to 15%. Talk to us about this.
Yeah, that's correct. Egg prices are dropping about 15% currently, and this is mainly due to the drop in price of poultry feed ingredients like maize. As we both know, we are currently in the harvest season, which means an increase in supply of foodstuffs as well as a reduction in price of them, which applies to maize too. Maize is a major component of feed, and this rounds up to about 70% of the production cost of eggs. So if you look at it, a reduction in price of maize leads to a reduction in production cost of the eggs, allowing the farmers to sell the eggs at a cheaper prices for the individuals. Alongside that, with the current inflation rate in Nigeria, consumers have reduced their demand for other commodities eaten alongside with eggs, like eating with the eggs such as yam, bread, and the like. So if the demand for that has reduced, this will come along and affect the price of the eggs too.
All right, but we're not seeing that same that happen with chicken prices. Chicken prices that stayed stable. Depending on where you're buying your chicken at this point. We're still seeing frozen chicken. The price has stayed stable, even though your report shows that egg prices have dropped.
Yes, that is correct. Instead of the regular identical trajectory in price that we ought to see between chicken and eggs, we are seeing them going in two different directions. But this is mainly because a commodity like chicken, consumers will go for its substitutes such as fish or beef. Unlike eggs doesn't really have that much substitutes and options as likes of chicken. Well, because aside that, Nigeria is a net importer of chicken. I mean, and we import chicken a lot into the country. And as of recent, that the exchange rate has been stabilized, it allows importers to bring chicken at a steady rate and sell it to the consumers, which allows the price to be which allows the price to be stable, unlike the eggs. Eggs are more sensitive, directly linked to the price of feed. So a change in that rapidly changes the price of eggs in the market, unlike that of a chicken.
We know Nigeria is a leading producer, of eggs in Africa. I think we made about $2.46 billion in revenue, or that's the projected revenue for 2025. But if you look at the projected revenue for a country like China, we're looking at $72.98 billion revenue from eggs. What can we learn from them?
Yeah, I mean, we have a lot to learn from a country like China. China is mainly making big use of innovation with modernized farming and use of technology in their research and their breeding of crops. So Nigeria has a lot to learn from a country like China, alongside with Brazil. Brazil is also a major exporter of chicken, and this is usually due to their chain supply and the logistics of it. And Nigeria has a lot to improve on that in terms of better road connection, reduction in the middleman services between the farmers directly to the buyer.
All right, I got so much to unpack there, but we'll keep tracking those prices, see if they, stay stable, and maybe chicken will join the eggs at some point. Thank you so much, Alamin Vincent, an FDC, an analyst with Financial Derivatives Company. Thank you for coming on today.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having me.
All right, let's move on to the markets now. Let's see who's making money and who's not. Starting with Africa, still positive sentiment right there, especially for the NGX. I had a pip there at the terminal. I see the most active stocks there, ICO, Insurance, GTCO, and we see the all-share index 0.40% up at intraday. Looks quite solid at this point. Maybe another positive close there for the market. I think we're getting used to closing positive, at this point. We have some news there in the market. Champs Holding Company PLC, one of Nigeria's leading fintech and identity technology firms, they officially launched a 7.65 billion naira hybrid capital raising offering comprising of right issue and a private placement aimed at strengthening its financial foundation and accelerating long-term growth. The rights issue will span about 2.34 billion ordinary shares, priced about $1.70 each, offered to existing shareholders on a 1-for-2 basis as of June 16, 2025. That component kicks off on August 8th and closes on September 12th, 2025, while the private placement portion opens, I think, September 1st and runs until September 12th. Both were unanimously approved at the company's annual general meeting there. And right here in South Africa, we see the Johannesburg Stock Exchange flirting with that $100,000 level, smack on there, 0.28% up, also following in positive territory. Let's look at other parts we track there. Looking at North Africa, yes, also positive there. EGX 30, 34,929 points, 0.66% up. And we see a laggard there for Monday. That's the Nairobi Stock Exchange Index. That's down 0.59% to close yesterday at 158 points. All right, let's look at our stories now. We see BP, still earnings season. BP PLC, they delivered an adjusted net income of about $2.4 billion in the second quarter, beating analyst consensus of about $1.8 billion, despite a 14% year-on-year decline from $2.8 billion. And we did hear from the CEO there, reaffirming BP's commitment to raising shareholder returns, announcing plans to conduct a fresh review of its portfolio and pursue further cost reductions beyond the state. Let's look at Middle East now. We did get Saudi Aramco there, their results earlier, and we see that's also shifting sentiment there. Dubai index, that was up 0.57% at intraday. That's in the UAE. Abu Dhabi, 0.16% is positive, 10,314 points. Other markets we track there, that's Saudi Arabia, the Tadawul there. Yeah, on the back of that earning report there from Saudi Aramco, 0.31% up. That's for the Tadawul, 10,873 points. And the Qatari index, big 0.93% at intraday. Looks like this market should close in the green, at this point. Let's get a check on the U.S. now. See the stock futures there. They're slightly higher today. That's for the Dow Jones Industrial Average, about 5 basis points, 44,327 points. The S&P 500 futures, that's 0.24%. Then we see a more convincing 0.35% uptick there for the tech-heavy NASDAQ, 23,378 points. Let's see if we're going to claim back that 24,000 points. That's for the NASDAQ. We did see Palantir shares. That jumped about 6% as a defense technology company said revenue surpassed $1 billion for the first time. That's for Q2. So we're seeing all of that sentiment there driving that market. Let's take a look at Asia now. We see Asia Pacific markets traded higher after U.S. President Donald Trump announced plans to significantly raise tariffs on Indian exports to the country there. So we see the Nikkei 0.64% close, Kospi 1.60% close, 0.68. That's for the Hang Seng Index. We'll flip over. We see India's market slipped at the open as investors kept an eye on trade developments between the U.S. and the South Asian nation there. And we see the impact there. It's down 0.30%. That's the Nifty 50, 24,649 points. And the Shanghai Composite, that's up a big 0.96%. So it's a different story there in the Asian market now. All right, let's get a check on what's playing out in Europe. We have Cassandra Sunt now joining us. Hello, Cassandra.
Hey, thanks for having me. Good to be here.
Yeah, it's great to have you, Cassandra. So what's playing out in the markets there? Are we still seeing that positive sentiment that started yesterday?
So far, yeah, British equities are rising today as investor confidence was lifted by a few upbeat results. And there are currently expectations that later this week, the Bank of England will announce another rate cut. So that's providing some additional support to the markets there. Overall, it seems like here in Europe, tariff concerns have eased a bit. London's blue chip FTSE 100 rose 0.4%. The Frankfurt DAX rose nearly 0.9% today after a steady climb yesterday. It has almost clawed back to the level it was on the day that the EU Commission President Ursula von der Leyen and US President Donald Trump announced a deal between those two economies. Remember, it took a little bit of a, I don't want to say a dive, maybe a dip after that. And meanwhile, in Paris, the CAC 40 is up 0.3%.
All right, you mentioned the U.S. trade deal there, which had the aim of minimizing the impact of tariffs on EU products. But, we also see, President Trump there, talking about slapping more tariffs on India. At this point, we see India actually, blaming the EU, for what's playing out there. Talk to me about all of this.
Yeah, we saw a little bit of the drama kind of spilling onto the Nifty 50 just a moment ago, but it is a little bit of drama, and I want to unbraid it for folks. And we'll start with the U.S. tariff announcement. Now, President Trump has said that the U.S. will raise tariffs on India because of its purchases of oil from Russia. India became a major buyer of Russian oil in the last few years and also a much-needed export market for Moscow after sanctions cut it off from its traditional fossil fuel buyers. Namely, we're talking here about the European Union. And it was a mutually beneficial relationship for these two countries. New Delhi saved billions while bolstering Moscow's coffers. But yesterday, US President Trump posted to his social media platform, Truth Social, saying that India is buying massive amounts of Russian oil and selling it, quote, for big profits. He added that because of this, the U.S. will raise the tariff paid on Indian goods imported into the United States. Now, there have been no details yet on the tariff level that he had in mind, but at the moment, there is a 10% U.S. tariff on Indian products, and it is expected to rise to 25% on Thursday.
And so, what's India's response to all of this?
Yeah, and this is where a bit of the blame game is coming into play. India on Monday argued that it only began importing from Russia because its traditional supplies were being diverted to Europe after the full-scale Russian invasion of Ukraine. Now, opponents of the Kremlin and architects of these sanctions packages that have passed in the West have argued that fossil fuel sales by Russia fund the war machine that is still operating in Ukraine. And when the European Union cut itself off from supplies of cheap Russian fossil fuels, it had to turn elsewhere to literally fuel its economy. But the Indian foreign minister pointed to what he called a double standard. And he said that both the EU and US are still trading with Moscow. He said both economies are still importing chemicals and fertilizers from Russia, while the European Union is also still buying mining products, iron, steel, and machinery.
All right, Cassandra, thank you so much. We'll keep tracking to see developments there. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, let's get a check on what's playing out in the crypto market. At this point, we're seeing a smack on Bitcoin alone in the red, and most of the greens on this side of the board, with Ethereum there up 2.08%, BNB trying to get back above that previous high. Solana, $168, also a big 2% uptick there. So we're seeing a divergence there between the big boss in the market, that's Bitcoin, and most of the top altcoins. Could that spell maybe alt season? Definitely, most traders are hoping for that to come at this point. But let's take the conversation further now. We see the Commodities Futures Trading Commission, they recently unveiled a crypto sprint that's enabling spot crypto trading contracts on registered futures exchanges using existing authority. And that's supposed to be working in tandem with the SEC's Project Crypto. The initiative aims to fast-track implementation of President Trump's digital assets roadmap and solidify the U.S. as a crypto regulatory hub. Well, joining us to discuss this now, we have Lolade Babalola as the founder in Endura Labs. Joining me via Zoom. Great to have you on the show.
Hi, Ladi. Great to be here again.
Yeah, so how will the responsibilities be divided, that's between the CFTC and the Securities and Exchange Commission in the U.S. under this new proposed scheme?
I wouldn't say everything is worked out yet, but definitely they'll be working hand in hand. There's plans to make sure, from like a futures trading standpoint, the CFTC might take the charge on that. But I think the underlying thing here is that the U.S. has become more pro-crypto versus what the administration before, and I hate to bash folks, but it was very obvious how anti-crypto Gary Gensler and the previous administration was. So the fact that we are in this place where the US is open, but being careful and inviting regulators into what this journey is going to look like is a step in the right direction.
All right, so what legal authority does the CFTC, what do they already have, when it comes to regulation, for spot trading? And where might the SEC authority overlap?
I definitely know that with respect to the regulation, the SEC still will be the prime voice with respect to regulation, but the SEC spans a lot of other things. But with the CFTC, it's going to be The focus areas are going to be like DeFi regulation, stable coins, market surveillance, and I think the last element might be cross-border coordination. And like I said, there is going to be a handshake. So it's not like the CFTC is just running solo on their own, trying to enforce or come up with policies without the SEC's involvement. So I think the CFTC tries to figure stuff out. We've had horrible situations in the past where some DeFi protocols have been criminalized. In this situation, we're moving to a world where it becomes let's get policy people in the room. Let's understand what. I'll give an example of maybe like privacy protocols. Tornado Cash was one where the founder might have been in court. If not, don't judge them, quote me here, but maybe prison at some point because it's a protocol that masks transactions here and there, but with at least the government, the CFTC, the SEC involved in this conversation, we know that the government is going to try to understand what protocols are supposed to do and how oversight can be put in place without stifling innovation.
Right, and you did mention Tornado Cash there. Is that still trading? I know they had a lot of issues before.
So legally, I believe the last time I checked, charges were dropped. So from a trading standpoint, being in the US, and based on the previous administration, I definitely veered and stayed off of Tornado Cash because of everything that was going on. And sometimes you don't want to touch things because I think with crypto is very interesting. The US has regulations that have to do with like blacklisted countries, and you didn't want to be involved with protocols that people from those countries also mess with, because once it's on the blockchain and somebody can just mess with you and send something from such an address to your address and you just become involved. But the charges, to the best of my knowledge, were dropped. And from a trading standpoint, I can't categorically say Tornado Cash is back on exchanges or trading right now. In the DeFi world, probably might be, but I don't know if on centralized exchanges if it's back on.
Exactly, yeah. So much to unpack there. Definitely a lot of regulation coming out at this time. But thank you so much, Ololade Babalola, the founder and Endura Labs. Thank you for coming on today.
Thank you for having me, Letty. Appreciate it all the time.
All right. And that's how most of the markets we track, trading. We'll give you more updates tomorrow. That's for the midweek trade. Thanks so much for watching. I'm Ladi Williams from the team right here at Channels HQ. It's bye for now.